Let's talk about autism and eating habits. Alright, so I could see this video being a sensitive topic for some people, so of course, if it is, either opt out of this video or be sure to check in with yourself throughout the video to see how you're doing, whether or not you're feeling activations within yourself, and if so, decide whether or not you need to take a break and come back to the video another time when you're more regulated, or if you have to just take a break altogether. It's okay to not be ready to process something, and that doesn't mean you'll never process it. It just means that you will process it when you feel more ready to. The topics I will be covering in today's video will be disordered eating and also how ADHD medication impacted my eating habits. And of course, I'm going to be talking about this through my own experiences. Therefore, not everyone with ADHD or autism is going to be exactly like me. When we hear people talking about issues surrounding eating, it comes from the viewpoint of you are broken, this thing is wrong, and we have to find ways to fix it. And a lot of the times it comes from a good place. I want to emphasize that. I'm not demonizing the culture surrounding trying to heal our relationship with food and eating and all of that. But at the same time, I feel like when you live with neurodiversity, it's not that simple, right? Where it's only about bad and then you have to heal it to make it good again, if that makes sense. It's a lot more nuanced than that. So I kind of want you guys to get in that sort of frame of mind while we explore this topic together, in a sense where I'm not necessarily saying that the eating habits that I have struggled with or that I have is necessarily good. It's not necessarily horrible either, in a way where I'm spending all of my day and time trying to fix it. I want to talk about it in a more neutral way in terms of this is just a pattern of mine. Yes, if it keeps going down a certain path, it's not healthy, but at the same time, at what point do I just adjust myself to my eating habits? And at what point do I have to keep pushing myself to adopt habits that are just not for me and doesn't necessarily work for me either? Let's just kind of get into that gray zone a little bit. I just wanted to preface that because when people hear things like, oh, I don't want to eat that thing because I don't want it right now, I don't crave it, I think it's normal for others to automatically judge you and think, oh, you're restricting yourself. And they assume that there's like this deeper rooted issue there. When sometimes for certain neurodivergent people, it's not that deep. It's genuinely like a sensory type of issue where for whatever reason, that texture irks you so bad that you cannot bring yourself to eat that food. It's not necessarily that you want to starve yourself. There's other situations that we could be in where maybe we're having a really difficult time with transitioning from one task to another. And so taking breaks in between to drink water and to eat something is really, really difficult. And it's not necessarily because we want to be skinny or to starve ourselves or any of that, but that ultimately ends up happening. You know what I'm saying? Like, I want to expand our idea that there are certain behaviors surrounding disordered eating that doesn't have to be rooted in the stereotype of wanting to look a certain way and control your body and your eating in a certain way. Sometimes there's a lot more reasons to it, and I just wanted to explore that together. So the first thing that I wanted to touch on is the concept of being picky versus being particular. I feel like there's a stereotype with autistic folks that we are very picky individuals when it comes to food. There's sometimes even memes that I see on TikTok of someone saying, guess who's the autistic one based off of what our plates at Thanksgiving looks like. And they'll show everyone's plates and it's just like every meal has all this variety in it. And then there's just this one plate that has macaroni and cheese and a bread on the side and none of it is touching each other. And then everyone in the comments is like, oh, it's so obvious which one's the autistic one. And although I do think there's a lot of autistic folks out there that do follow underneath that stereotype, I also do feel like there's a lot of autistic folks that don't fall under that stereotype. If you were to see the way that I eat and all the things that I eat throughout my life, you probably wouldn't think I was autistic, because I could basically eat anything. It doesn't mean I want to, but I can. And it doesn't necessarily bother me, but I don't necessarily enjoy it. You know what I'm saying? What I've come to realize is that my ADHD actually profoundly affects my relationship with food, because food was my #1 dopamine resource. Before I was diagnosed and properly medicated for my ADHD, my brain was completely different. Whenever I would wake up in the morning, the first thought I would have is of food. My whole life was surrounded and driven by food, what I was gonna eat, how was I going to acquire this food, how was I going to eat this food, what was I going to watch while I was eating this food, where was I going to be when I ate this food, how was I going to sit or lie down while eating this food. It's like everything in my life that mattered was built surrounding the most euphoric rituals around food I could create. And so when it comes to this topic of being picky or particular about food, I realized I don't think I was ever really picky. But at the same time, if you reflect on what I just shared with you, that is a form of being particular and picky. Having that one very specific thing in mind and needing to do anything at whatever cost to get that thing. It's not that I was picky in a sense where I couldn't eat anything else, but I was particular in a sense where I had to eat that one very specific thing. And so fast forward, when I started to get properly medicated for my ADHD, I wasn't thinking about food anymore. And going through this for the past few years has been absolutely insane. Just seeing the two different brains that I had, basically, one on meds and one off meds. When I would wake up, I would start thinking about food. Take my medication within 15 to 30 minutes, all of a sudden I'm just thinking about the day and what I wanted to get done. And then food was just an afterthought. I didn't even think about it until I was hungry, which is what's normal, right? Like, you only really think about food when you need to eat food and your body's hungry. What I came to realize is that I wasn't creating these very specific rituals around food anymore and doing whatever it took to obtain that food. And I wasn't centering food in my life anymore the way that I was for almost my whole life. I really don't know how to explain to people what it feels like as someone with ADHD and neurodivergence to partake in your main resource of dopamine like that. But it's almost like you enjoy that thing 10 times more than an average person. And so it was really interesting for me to actually just not care so much about food, be able to just eat something because I know that it sustains my body and not because I'm thinking about it all day, every day. What I've also come to realize as my relationship to food started to change with the proper medication is that I started to get a lot pickier than I was ever before throughout my life. And let me kind of explain what pickiness is like for me. When I'm finally ready to settle down and eat something because I'm hungry or whatever, I find it a lot harder to figure out what I want to eat because it's almost like my mind wasn't thinking about food. And I think my autistic part of myself has a hard time with transitions, right? And so when I go from work to now needing to eat something at the end of the day, I'm just like, I don't really know what I want to eat. I'm not craving anything specific. I'm physically hungry, but I just don't know what I want to eat. And therefore, I'm not necessarily motivated to cook anything. This is where it gets really difficult because there's times where I'll spend 30 minutes cooking something. And then at the end of it, I'm just looking at the food and I'm like, I don't really want to eat that. Whether it's a texture or whether it has a flavor that I don't really want to taste in that moment. And it's not because I'm picky. Like if I took that food and gave it to myself another day where I was craving it, I would eat it all up and it would be great. But it's like in that very particular moment, my taste buds and what I want is not that. And so I go through this really difficult thing where if I don't absolutely want it full-heartedly, I can't eat it because I don't want to eat it. It's like, yes, I could force myself to eat it, but I'm not gonna enjoy it. It's not gonna feel good. And so why would I do that to myself? You know, food isn't as important as it was before. And so for me to want to eat it, it has to be made important, if that makes sense. I have to really want it. I can't just eat something because it's there and I have to eat something. I'll hyper focus on one specific meal and type of food for at least a week. So for 1 week, I'll just only eat Chick-fil-A every single day because it's the only thing I crave and it tastes the same every time. It's easy for me to eat. If I can't eat Chick-fil-A and I have something else that I need to eat, it won't taste good to me. And so I feel like I can't even eat it and I'll just eat a few bites of it. And then that's not good because I won't be eating the amount of food that I need to be eating, right? And that's the thing is people will see that sort of behavior of like you taking 2 bites of food after a whole day of not eating and they'll be like, something's wrong here. Like you shouldn't be restricting yourself like that. It's really hard to just explain to them like, I want to eat. I want to eat so bad. Like I'm hungry. I want to chow down. It's just, I don't crave this food right now and I don't really want to finish it. It's that simple. More and more the past few years, I've been able to figure out the differences between, okay, I'm physically hungry now. And it's because before I was medicated for the ADHD, I was constantly mentally hungry. Even if you're so full and you're satiated and you just ate a lot, for example, your mind is still thinking about food. And if the food is good, your mind still wants to eat and taste that food. And so I will end up overeating because the food tastes good and I just want to keep eating it and eating it and eating it. And then I'll eat myself until I feel sick. And I literally couldn't tell what feeling full was like until I felt that sick feeling. But here's where I'm still struggling is to now feel mentally hungry. And that brings about other issues, right? And one isn't necessarily worse than the other. It's just different. It's kind of like an inverse experience. When my ADHD is running my life and my brain is like constantly thinking about food and what it wants to eat. And it ignores my body's signals. Whereas when my autistic side is the primary driving force of my life, the only way I could tell when I'm hungry is when my body is telling me that. And my mind is not necessarily telling me that because I get so hyper focused on other stuff. And then food is like not even a thought in my head. And so when my body's like, yo, it's time to go eat something, and I go to the kitchen, I'm just standing there. I'm like, I don't even know what I want to eat. And therefore, I don't know what to cook or what food to order. And therefore, I just kind of want to skip this meal. If I'm having a really difficult time that particular week or month with feeling hunger mentally and being able to plan accordingly, I'll definitely rely on comfort foods. So I'll end up eating the same meal every day for weeks. It works for me. It gets food in my system. That's, to me, better than just spending a whole day not eating. I'm trying to figure out how I want to deal with that through experimentation and being open and empathizing for myself and finding ways to accommodate myself and deciding whether or not I want to push myself outside my comfort zone. Because some people will say things like, well, it's not good to not eat. You have to find a way to force yourself to eat and things like that. I just feel like advice like that sometimes, as a neurodivergent person, you really have to take that with a grain of salt and figure out ways to adjust that advice to suit yourself in a way where you're not building life systems that contrasts with what actually would work for you and regulate you, right? And therefore, you don't want to enable that internalized shame again and again because you're forcing yourself to work against your system. So for example, I'm not going to feel good about myself or feel good physically if I'm constantly forcing myself to eat when I don't want to eat and eating stuff I don't want to eat. I won't feel good physically and I won't feel good mentally because I'm just gonna be beating myself up the whole time because I'm frustrated with myself that I'm being so difficult, right? And the thing is, every autistic person is going to be different. Their relationship to food and their pickiness is going to vary depending on who they are and what circumstances they're living through and their responses to those circumstances. It's almost like when my life was so dysregulating and unpredictable and I felt so unsafe, food was the only thing that made me feel good in such a chaotic time that it didn't really matter what food it was or how it tasted. It just mattered that it was the only safe thing I had. And so in a way, it made me more open to all different types of food. Whereas now, I feel so safe and so good, and I could be very conscientious about what I want to do in my life, and I have a choice. And so in that sense, I'm like, okay, now that I have a choice, I want that one thing. I want that one thing, nothing else. Things that I do to accommodate myself when it comes to my relationship with food now is that I have to pay a lot of attention to being physically regulated, because physical regulation for me is directly correlated to my interoception. And therefore, if my interoception is struggling and I'm dysregulated, I could very easily end up not eating for a day. You know, that's just how it is for me. And it's not because I'm trying to stay skinny. It's not because of anything other than just there's so many more important things to me than food. When I'm physically regulated and my interoception is improved, I don't have to wait till I'm shaking and starving to know that I'm hungry. So I can kind of tune into the finite sensations of my body and know what that means. And that really, really does help to be able to feel the physical hunger, because when I feel the physical hunger, it could start to go into my brain and I could start thinking like, okay, I'm hungry. So what food sounds good right now? And then it kind of helps me transition better when it comes down to getting food in my system, because after an hour or two, I'll have been able to process, let's say, what I wanted to eat and whether or not I had to cook it or order it or whatever. Another reason why physical regulation helps me eat is because I have an easier time with transitions when I am physically regulated. So when I am not physically regulated, I have a tendency to hyper-focus too intensely to a point where I am neglecting myself physically. I'll not use the bathroom, I'll not drink water, and I will not eat. And it's almost like I don't even know I'm going through that deficit until I hit these breaking points. And that's not a good thing, right? Ooh, I have to go pee, let me go. Ooh, I have to drink water, let me drink some water. That comes with being physically regulated because I have no issues with pausing what I'm doing to attend to those physical needs, because I don't feel like I have to get this thing done right now or I have to keep doing it. When I'm physically regulated, I feel like I have all the time in the world. It's no problem to go take a drink of water in the kitchen. It's no problem to go take a bathroom break. It's no problem to go quickly eat something, right? I could always come back to what I'm doing. I could take these breaks. And I'm not saying I don't still struggle with transitions in a way. It's just a lot easier to feel like I could come back to it, if that makes sense. And another thing that really helps me is I allow myself to hyper-focus on my comfort foods without judging myself and without feeling ashamed for it. So you kind of have to weigh out the pros and cons for this one. For example, when I hyper focus on, let's say, Chick-fil-A, some people might say like that's not responsible for you to eat out every single day for like a month. And yes, it's not financially responsible per se than to buy groceries and cook your own meals. But for me, if I allow myself to eat my comfort food for that month, I'll have a better chance of eating every single day than if I were to force myself to eat what I cook. And to me, it's more of a priority for me to eat every day than to save money. And that's kind of where you have to weigh out the pros and cons, right? Because for some people, they may not be able to afford to eat Chick-fil-A every day, right? And this is why intersectionality is also such an important topic. But this is also why having neurodiversity or having autism in particular could be disabling in a sense, because it's not necessarily feasible to have to choose between losing more money or eating. And you're unable to eat unless you spend a certain amount of money on something that is the only thing that you can eat, right? And that's something that I've had to really experiment with and consider and process, is at what extent am I willing to accommodate myself? Maybe it'll transform in the future, but where I'm at now is I prioritize accommodating myself because I've never really accommodated myself my whole life. I was always pushing myself into uncomfortable situations and doing things in uncomfortable ways. So I think it's more important for me at this point in my life to figure out what it means to actually accommodate what my needs are. And sometimes it means spending a lot more money on food that month because I'm having a really hard time eating and craving food. And so the only way to get me to eat food is to eat that one specific comfort food again and again every single day. Sometimes what that also means is I'll cook something and I won't eat it. I'll spend extra money on that comfort food ultimately, and I just have to take that loss. Another thing to weigh out is the nutritional part of it, you know, because sometimes our comfort foods are not nutritionally dense. Only being able to eat chicken nuggets and stuff like that and not being able to eat anything else, or only being able to eat ice cream and not being able to eat anything else. Like, eating ice cream every day as your only meal is not necessarily healthy, but at the same time, those same people would otherwise not eat anything at all. And that's even worse than not eating anything. And so food could be such a difficult aspect of an autistic person's life. And my heart really goes out to anyone out there who really struggles with food. You're just trying to find ways to accommodate yourself and prioritize certain things, knowing that you will never truly fully be able to take care of every aspect of yourself because of how your brain works, you know? And so for me, on those months where I'm really struggling with being able to eat stuff and the only thing I could eat is Chick-fil-A, for example, I try to counteract my health in other ways. So whether that means doing more body movement, whether that means going on more walks, whether that's making sure that I'm taking more vitamins and supplements, I try to make sure that I take care of myself physically in other ways. And luckily, I feel like my body naturally balances these types of things out. So if I am coming out of a month of just eating Chick-fil-A, let's say the next month, I'll start to crave a lot of nutritionally dense things. So I'll crave a lot of kale, I'll crave a lot of raw ingredients. Just allowing my body to move instinctually in that way has been helpful. And that's the thing about autistic folks or neurodivergent folks sometimes, is we kind of go through these hills and valleys in a sense. It's definitely different from what we're taught is good and normal, but I think it's worth exploring the concept of the difference not necessarily being worse, but just coming with different sets of issues to deal with, but also different benefits. Those are ways that I've been trying to accommodate myself as someone living with ADHD. And this is what my relationship with food has been like and what it's transformed to. Again, it'll probably continue to transform, right? Because I'm a human being and I'm ever growing, ever changing. But yeah, I hope that this video has been helpful for you guys and has been validating in some sort of way. I'd be curious to hear from you guys what your relationship to food has been like. What are the things that you may struggle with and how have you been able to accommodate yourself? Maybe there's something that you guys have figured out that someone else could benefit from. So let's just share those experiences down in the comment section below. Thank you guys for watching today's video, and I will see you guys on the next one. Take care.